So a lot of beginners, we'll go over kind of a high-level overview of what Node is. We'll talk a little bit about JavaScript and how JavaScript bring Node about, why JavaScript is important on the client side, and that'll give some background on why Node is important as well. What Node is, why Node is important, JavaScript on the server side with Node, Node.js, the programming style using callbacks. We'll talk a little bit about two NPM modules, Express.js and Socket.io that we'll be using to build a chat application. And then we'll go over some code that's used to build a chat application written with Express.js and Socket.io. And then we'll open it up for questions. You guys can ask me whatever you want about Node. So let's talk about JavaScript first. What is JavaScript? You guys kind of just yell out what you've heard about JavaScript, what you've used JavaScript for, and kind of what you know about it so far.
Create library, maybe.
Yeah, so it's a dynamic scripting language, and a couple buzzwords with JavaScript are prototype-based inheritance, first-class functions, and object-based programming. I say object-based programming because it's not object-oriented programming. It's object-based programming. We'll kind of go over that a little bit in detail too if you guys are interested. So why is JavaScript so important? A couple of reasons are the event-driven programming style. There's also the fact that JavaScript is asynchronous, which makes concurrency a great thing in Node.js, and it's part of the front-end trio. The front-end trio, that's what I call HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And those are the three languages that your browser knows how to interpret, which is why they're the three languages that make up all of your front-end code and what you as the client see when you visit a web page. So JavaScript is the logic portion of that, which is why it's so important on the client side. And why does it work so well on the client side? It's because of browser events. As a user, you interact with the web page, so you need to be able to have the web page respond to events like you clicking on a button or you hovering over something, events like that. And that's why JavaScript is so great for the client side, because it's event-driven by nature. So Node.js, a little background on Node.js. It was invented by Ryan Dahl in 2009, and it's meant to solve concurrency issues, or non-concurrency issues, with current server-side programming languages and frameworks. It's written in C, C++, and JavaScript, and so it can be blazing fast. It can compete with Nginx, which is why it's very valuable as a language to build servers. So why do we use Node.js? It gives us the ability to use JavaScript on the server side, and it gives us the ability to use JavaScript as a server-side scripting language that parallels something like Python or Ruby or PHP that's traditionally used on the server side. It also allows us to build blazing fast, I/O-heavy applications, and that's just because it does concurrency very well by nature, and it has this event loop that allows it to handle I/O very well. It also allows us to create a web app using only JavaScript code from the front end to the back end, and that's what the mean stack is. It's a full stack written in JavaScript, which makes it very easy for developers to transition from something like front-end development to back-end development in a similar language with different concepts, but also in the same language. Do you guys have any questions so far? Feel free to ask me questions. It's a small group, so let's keep it lively. Concurrency is basically just things happening at the same time. So traditionally, there's been a problem with handling concurrent connections or multiple requests that need to be handled at the same time.
Can you give an example of input-output applications? Like, is it something like you buy a product and in the receipt kind of thing, or what? Is it mostly on the back end?
I/O is just any process that involves input and output. That could be taking in a request and having to do some logic and then serve a response. It can be a database taking in some requests and serving a response. It can be reading and writing to a file. All of those processes can be characterized as I/O. So let's move on to server-side JavaScript. Node.js is what allows us to apply that event-driven programming scheme that we know from JavaScript to the server side. So it allows us to treat things that we traditionally haven't treated as events as events. What I'm talking about with that is things like database serving data. That could be now treated as an event, or a request coming in, an HTTP request for some web page can now be treated as an event. And instead of handling that as a separate connection, as a separate thread that many other server-side languages traditionally did, we can now handle that with a single threaded model that Node.js gives, which is great. So what is Node.js? And a lot of people have this question because some people hear that Node.js is a server or Node.js is a JavaScript framework. And a lot of those answers are partially correct. But at the base level, what Node.js is it's a platform for running JavaScript code. It's a platform that runs on the Google Chrome V8 engine that allows you to run JavaScript code. And it comes with certain tools that can be considered a framework that allow you to build a server very well. And it allows you to take advantage of that event-driven programming style on the server side. But it can also be used to run JavaScript scripts. So many people use that in QA to run JavaScript scripts. So this is a simple Hello World app written in Node.js. And it basically just creates a server and writes Hello World to the response for every request that comes in. And it listens on port 3000. But the reason I wanted to show you guys this is a perfect example of the Node.js programming style that kind of extends a typical JavaScript style that uses callbacks. And many people initially get confused with what these functions are doing. What they are is they're lists of instructions that we're passing to a function, in this case http.createServer. And what that list of instruction does is it tells us what we need to do anytime a request comes in. And that's kind of the event-based programming style, where that function request response, is what gets triggered anytime a request comes in. So anytime a request comes in, it triggers an event that runs that list of instructions, which is a pretty cool programming style. This is a file system line code, and I wanted to use this to illustrate how callbacks are used to handle synchronicity and asynchronicity in JavaScript. So in this case, fs.readFile will read the file index.html, the first parameter that's passed to it, and then run the function doneReading when it's done reading, and pass it information about the file that was just read. So in this case, the callback is being used to illustrate or to handle some functionality that needs to happen after a particular function is done. And that's kind of something that goes on to become something that's known as callback hell in JavaScript and in Node.js that I'm sure those of you who have worked with Node.js have seen. But it's where you kind of nest these callbacks to get pieces of code to run after each other. Cool. So let's talk about Express.js real quick before we jump into the chat room application. Express.js is a Node module that we use a lot at Coding Dojo, and it's a great way to build web applications using Node.js. It's a very thin layer that makes life easier without kind of detracting from what Node.js does best, and that typical programming scheme of using callbacks and that event-driven programming scheme. So it's also the go-to web development framework for Node developers. And it's a great way to build web apps that you can organize yourself, that isn't too intrusive when it comes to organization and telling you what you have to do and what rules you have to follow. So it's a great way to build web applications. It's not something as robust as Rails or a framework like that, but it's also something that allows you to customize it a lot. So this is a Hello World app using Express on top of Node.js, and you can see that it's a lot simpler than the previous Hello World app that we used, but it still uses that callback to say that, hey, when we have a GET request to the /route, we're gonna run this list of instructions every time that request is sent, and that kind of holds true with the Node nature of programming. So this is a Hello World app written in Express. Do you guys have any questions on this so far, or anything I've talked about so far? So.
What does the rec do? You have request as well as response, right?
Yeah, great question. So that function that takes in request and response is a callback function. And the meat of the logic that's going on is actually behind the scenes in that app.get. That app.get is saying, hey, let's handle a GET request to the /route. And when we get that request, let's run this list of instructions. Let's pass it information about the request, the rec in that case, and information about where to write or send the response, which is the res in that case. Any other questions? So let's talk about Socket.io. Socket.io is one of the cool parts about Node. Node, because it handles concurrency very well, is awesome at WebSockets. And Socket.io is the Node module that really helps us out with creating those WebSockets and creating applications that are real time. So they're different. WebSockets are different from traditional HTTP requests and responses in the fact that they support a bi-directional data flow rather than unidirectional. What I mean by that is with a traditional HTTP request, the client has to send a request and the server has to reply with a response. The server can't immediately send a response without a request being made. So there's that one direction that data flows in. With WebSockets, data can flow in both ways. So once you create that handshake and once you create that connection, the server can push data to the client while the client can also push data to the server. And that's a cool application of that is chat rooms, but also if you guys have been on Gmail and things like that, when you get these push notifications, those are WebSockets in action. So let me show you a quick chat room application that I have up here. This is the code for it. Let me show you it in action first. So I'm going to go to localhost 8000. It's Jay. And localhost 8000. I'll use Jimmy for this example. And this is a chat room where if I type hello here, it shows up on both screens. It shows up here, and that's in real time. That's leveraging WebSockets. And if I type in hi, how's the talk going? In here, it'll show up on both sides. Also, if I disconnect, it'll show Jimmy is disconnected. If I connect, it'll similarly show Jimmy has connected. Or Jimmy has joined the chat. So let's go over the code for this. The first thing I want to show you guys is the server side. The server side is on the left-hand side, and the client side is on the right-hand side. And you can see that this is two files. The server side is 36 lines long, and the client side is 43 lines long. So it's not a lot of code, but it's doing a lot for you, and it's doing a lot to keep up that connection. So let's go over this a little bit line by line. First, we require Express. We set up the Express application, and we require a path. That just allows us to kind of understand our paths better. You'll see it in a couple of functions like here and here. And then we set up our static content server. That's what I'm using that for in this example is serving up the CSS that creates the div for the chat box. It's not too much CSS. It's about 5 lines of CSS. I'm not going to show it to you, but it's very short. And I'm putting this up on GitHub so that you guys can pull it down and use it to create your own chat application and take it further. So to really play around with Node, Express, and Socket.io. So here we set up our view engine. We're using that to serve up this EJS page. EJS is a templating engine that you can use with Express. And here is a similar line to what you saw with Hello World, where we're handling the GET request to the root route, and we're responding by rendering the index page. And then we listen, and this is kind of where the meat of our logic goes for sockets, where we're telling sockets to listen on the same server that we're using to serve up the index page. And when we handle a connection, we're going to set up all of these listeners for all of the various socket events that we may potentially handle. And this is pretty cool because, as you see here, the sockets and the socket code is very similar to the event-driven programming style of what you would do on the client side. Can you guys see this all right? Is this big enough? It's very similar to the event-driven programming style that we would do on the client side. There's a lot of ons, there's a lot of emits, and those are emitting events and listening for events, which is pretty cool because it mimics that events, the events that we handle on the client side. So here what we're doing is we're handling an event where we have a new user that will be emitted by the client, where if the client, as soon as the client connects, we're going to prompt for the client's name, and then we're going to emit the new user event with that client's name. And over here, we're handling that new user event by first keeping track of the client in an array here, or in a JavaScript object here. And I haven't put in a database, but if you guys pull this down and want to modify it, you guys can put in whatever database you want to do, you want to use, and modify it however you see fit. And we're emitting this initial messages event. And the reason we're emitting that is because if a client connects and there's been some chat logs before, then they want to see what was said before. So we're emitting that initial messages event. And that emits to that particular socket. It doesn't emit to everyone. And the cool thing about this part is, or about the socket code, is you will see broadcasts and emitting that can happen to all of the connections, all of the WebSockets that are connected. So then we keep track of this message where we say that Jay has joined the chat, or whoever put in their name has joined the chat. We keep track of all of the messages for when we want to emit initial messages, and then we broadcast that message to everyone. And this line of code, socket.broadcast.emit, basically broadcasts the message and the new message event to everyone except for the socket that connected. And so if you're on the client side, you can listen for that event, and if you get a new message event, you can append a message to a chat box. So we also handle the message submit event over here, and in the event that a message is submitted, we emit to everyone, which is IO emit, new message, which has the data about the message that was submitted. Also for disconnecting, it's the same story. We emit to everyone except for the socket that disconnected that we have a new message with a particular message Jay has disconnected, whoever made it. On the client side, it's very similar. And the cool thing about this is if you look at code that is done with jQuery, handling submit events or click events, it looks very similar to events that we handle with sockets. So over here, what we're doing is we're handling a submit event, and we have this callback, which is a list of instructions on what to do when that form is submitted. Over here, it's very similar, where we have an initial messages event, and we have a list of instructions on what to do after that initial messages event is triggered. So you can see that the code is very similar between handling events how you guys know on the client side, as well as handling events for sockets with Socket.io. Do you guys have any questions on this? Yes, Ralph?
Is it multiple events handled, or like along with that bubbling too, or even bubbling?
So what's happening here is we have multiple events being listened for. Okay. So we have the new message event being listened for, we have the initial messages event being listened for, but it's all alongside this submit event being listened for and kind of those native events that the browser listens for. Any other questions? So let's go back to the slide. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had, guys. So I was hoping for more questions. So if you guys have any questions on Node, feel free to ask them. Feel free to shoot away. I know it won't be good.
What are some areas that you think you could go more in depth in?
Oh yeah, so with Node, I would suggest getting up and running with Express first, because it's a very easy way to get a web application up and running, and kind of explore things with sockets, pull down my chat room code, and play around with it. Use it as a starter kit. Sorry, put this. Yeah, so you can go on my GitHub, you can pull that down, use it as a starter kit to explore what you would do on your own with chat.
And why is Node called a full stack framework or something?
So Node.js is just a platform for running JavaScript code, which is why you can run a framework like Express on it. You can use it to run all of the backend JavaScript code, and you can use it as kind of the pillar in your full bean stack. If you look at the bean stack, the M is for MongoDB, the E is for Express, N is for Node, and A is for Angular. Angular will run on the front end, on the client side, but Node and Express will serve up all of that Angular code.
What other applications is Node reliable for? Besides email and
So Node can be used to build any website or any web application. So you don't have to use sockets. Sockets, I just wanted to show you guys because it's a very cool application. WebSockets, WebSockets don't run exclusively on Node. You can use WebSockets with other Node is especially good at doing WebSockets. So you can build any web application or any website or with Express. And you can also use Node as a scripting tool to run JavaScript scripts that you use.
Can you elaborate a bit more on sockets?
Yeah, so socket, basically what it is, traditionally you have an HTTP request response cycle where you have the client may type into the browser www.google.com, right? And that'll send a request to the server, which will do some logic and then serve up the Google web page in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So that'll come back, and that's a unidirectional data flow, right? What sockets is first you send that request, and you use that to make like a handshake with the server. And then the client and the server are kind of in tune, and they have a connection built where the client can emit to the server, while the server can also emit to the client. So traditionally, if you were to build a chat application and you didn't have access to WebSockets, what you would have to do is you would have to make a request. The client would have to make a request to the server every 20 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds and say, hey, did we get any new messages? Did we get any new information? And that's very expensive. The client constantly has to ask the server, and the server may be like, no, we didn't get anything. Why are you asking all over again? With sockets, the server can just sit there, and the client can say, hey, let me know when you have new messages. And the server can say, yeah, we just got a new message, here you go. And that's kind of how.
Do you know some other projects or products that we might be familiar with that definitely use Node?
So anything that uses that is real time may not necessarily use Node, but it uses sockets. For Node, I know a lot of like Walmart is using Node now. That was the most recent one that I read about, and a lot of people are bringing Node in as both scripting tools for kind of their DevOps, as well as a tool to build a portion of their website. If you're still building like a CRUD data-driven API, you're not going to necessarily choose Node over Rails for that. But Node is very good for scripting as well as WebSockets and some other applications.
Can you give a live example for concurrency?
Yeah. So say I'm a server, and all of you guys are the browsers that are connecting to the server. And anytime I get a request, if I were using PHP, then if someone requested, say, a list of users, or let's say we're on Amazon.com and we're searching for a product, then as the server, when you type that in and you press enter, as the server, I have to go find the list of products that match your search and bring them back to you. With PHP, what would happen is the request would come to the server and say, hey, we need a list of products. Then the request would just sit there and wait, and the server would sit there and wait and say, hey, okay, we can't do anything else until we get this list of products for this particular request. We can't handle any more requests. We're not open. We have to first finish this one, and then we can handle more requests. And then it would hand off some info on what to do to the database. It would say, hey, give me the products, and it would still be waiting. It wouldn't be able to do anything else. So it would have to wait until the database comes back with those products. The products would come back. It would take those products, hand them to the request that came in, and send a response back with those products. Right? With Node, that's an example of not being able to do concurrent actions, right? Not being able to handle multiple requests. With Node, what you can do is a request can come in, and Node will say, okay, a request came in. Here is the person I need to handle that request. Here's a list of instructions, the callback in this case, on what to do, on what I need to do when you're done. So I'm going to run that list of instructions only when you're done. Come back to me and tell me when you're done. In the meantime, I'm going to handle all the requests. That's the example. An analogy that I love to use is if imagine you had a roommate and you were expecting a package to come over the weekend. And you said, hey, I'm going to be out of town. Can you accept this package? Can you sign it? Then the PHP way of doing things, and I'm not bashing on PHP, I'm just using this. But the PHP way of doing things would be your roommate would wait on the doorstep and sit there until the delivery guy comes and hands him the package. And then he would sign, and then he would go back inside and start doing other stuff. The node way of doing things, the event-driven way of doing things, would be your roommate would kind of walk around in the house, wash the dishes, whatever he wants to do, watch TV. And then when the doorbell rings, he would go outside, sign for the package, and go back inside. That's kind of an example of being able to do concurrent actions. In this case, watching the dishes, watching TV, while still waiting for that next request.
What are some major challenge areas when you're learning Node?
So callbacks is the biggest one. Many people have a tough time kind of understanding callbacks. And if you look at this code, an instinct for beginner developers is to say that, hey, the majority of the logic is happening in that function, request, response, etc. The majority of the logic on waiting for the request to come in happens in the http.create server. But the logic for what to do after that request comes in happens in that function. So that's it.
And I was wondering about the numbers in this. So is that like a counter, or is it like a pixel thing saying what the chat room looks like? So in this you have 200 and you have 3,000. And on a different page I saw 3,000.
200 is just the okay message. It's like 404 means bad request or whatever. 200 means okay, this was okay. 3,000 in this case is just the report that we're listening. So. It's so a closure is a function that's passed in, and then it has access to enclosed variables because it's returned from the function. The way a callback is different is a callback is actually a function that's passed to another function as an argument. So they're not the same thing, but they can, they're not the same thing. But it's basically a closure ends up being a function that's returned from another function, and that's how it has access to those enclosed variables. A callback is an argument that's passed to another function. So in this case, the create server function takes in one parameter, which is that callback function. And another example here, we're passing two parameters, index.html and done reading. Now what done reading actually is a function, a callback function. Event loop, yeah, sure. So the event loop is basically when in that example where I was Node and I was handling requests. The event loop is me saying, okay, I have these requests to handle. I have these callbacks from all of the events that got triggered from the database being done and all of those things. And I have my loop of, okay, I'm going to handle this request. Then the next thing in the queue is to run these callback instructions. So I'm going to do that next. And that's kind of the loop of me running through all of those actions. Basically, Node is single-threaded, so there's one kind of worker handling all of that stuff. And things get put into this queue to be run.
I can't have more than one event loop in one application, in one server.
In one server, no. Which I mean, you can, if you wanted to scale, you can have that same Node server running.
Single threaded server.
So
It should be single threaded.
yeah, Node is a single threaded, runs with a single threaded. Good question. Other question?
So, how do you do tools development? Why should a tools developer know about Node.js?
So just as you would write scripts with Ruby or Python, you can now write scripts with JavaScript, and that's kind of what the tools guy would do. It's kind of like, hey, what's your language of choice? But a lot of people like writing scripts in Ruby. Some people like writing scripts in Python. Some people like writing scripts in C++ or Go or whatever it may be. Now you can write scripts in JavaScript, and you can take advantage of some of the JavaScript constructs like first-class functions.
Additional threads and Node.js.
You cannot. What people do when they want to scale Node.js is they just clone that Node.js server that they've built and just put a load balancer in front to.
No, one machine means one server. Then I have more than one server on one machine.
You can use something like PM2, which is a process manager, to spawn multiple node processes running. But they would be multiple node servers running on that same machine.
And why is Node important for a gray box or tester or web tester?
Many times the QA kind of testing scripts are maybe written in JavaScript, and Node is just a way to run them.
So you said like you use 3000 as a port number, right? Port number. So that's for one application. So on the same server, I want to have a different application. I have to use a different port number, right? So for example, 3200. So in the URL, how do you? Because usually you won't specify the port number. So how do you do that in the configuration?
So what you could do is you can just point a domain to the server running on 3200 and a different domain pointing to a server running on 3000, or you can use subdomains, something like that.
Is that in the which configuration? Is that in the?
That's in GoDaddy or whatever, wherever you got your domain from. You would point, like for example, say I built a Rails application and I had a little part of that Rails application which was a chat box written in Node.
But compared to the Apache, is in the Apache configuration, you can just have one, for example, one domain. You have different tasks for different application. Then you in the Apache configuration, you can specify, say this port is for this application, and this port is for different application. So in Node, is there any like similar configuration? I can say this port number is for this path of an application, and then that port number is for this.
You can do that if you put like Nginx or Apache in front of Node.
So still have to use Apache.
You may have to. If you're doing something like that configuration, then you could put a web server in front of Node that would delegate to Node as an application server.
So is that way? No, don't use Apache. Don't use web server. Just purely configure in Node.
Yeah, you could do that. But so if you were to build an application in Node.js, you may not, or you won't have to use multiple ports, because that application, you can have different parts of that application, or different modules of that application.
Node.js application is single-threaded. Does it mean only one core on multi-core machine will be used?
Yes, that's a downside of Node.js. That's why there was a fork, io.js, which takes advantage of it.
Okay, so that means other 7 cores won't be used.
Yeah.
I can use thread affinity.
So
Can I assign event loop thread to a particular core?
I'm sure you can. Yeah, I think if you used a tool like PM2 or Strongloop, you can probably do that. That's why there's a fork of Node.js, io.js, which aims to solve that.
If they ask the backend tester to write a fork or like a repository or like an API search engine, does the code has to be in bucket, or can they use Node.js to do the GitHub profile, or we have to write a program for API search?
So Node.js will run on the server side.
Right.
So if you were to build an application that would do like an API search, you can send that API request from the client side if the API allows for that. Or you can use Node.js to send a server side API request.
Okay, so we can. And from recruiter perspective, right, so we have a couple of recruiters here, so what are the top 3 questions we can ask any Node developer to see if he's really strong or like if he's a good fit for our position?
I mean, I think you could just ask them. If I were in that position and I was asking someone to judge whether they were a good Node developer, I would probably just ask them to explain to me kind of the programming style of Node, because it is pretty different from a lot of other languages, and some other languages, like we've been doing some work with Python using Flask as a micro framework, that does something very similar to Node, or has a similar look and feel to Node. But other other backend languages really do not. So it's very unique that concept of callbacks being used so much in Node development. So if they understand that and they can talk about it, I would say that they got a pretty good handle on that. Other question?
Anybody working on Node? What exactly you guys are doing? Maybe you can talk about. A couple of people who use Node.
Well, I was also going to ask, maybe you could say something about Coding Dojo. But
yeah.
we should also do this group discussion. So I don't know what should come first, but
So I know Samia mentioned that I work at Coding Dojo. Coding Dojo is a 14-week intensive coding boot camp where we teach students web development, and we teach 3 full stacks. One of them being the meat stack, which I specialize in, and I teach people the full meat stack, including Node. We teach web development. We're moving into mobile, and we get people from 0 to, I would say, 90, and give them the tools to go the rest of the way.
anyone want to share their projects?
Quite true.